Welcome student. So in this video we will be learning about more about the brain, how the transmission takes place between two neurons and the spinal cord. Now, starting with the transmission of messages through neurons. How the message transfer from one neuron to other. Let's say this is the one neuron and there is another neuron the dendrites, the nerve ending, and let's draw the other neuron. These are the dendrites of another neuron, and here are the nerve ending for the same. These are dendrites, right? There is always a gap between two neurons, and that gap is known as synapse. And messages conveys from from one neuron to another neuron through this. Now, in neuron, the messages are passed inside the neuron. It is an electrical signal, but between two, it converts into chemical signal. And this entire transmission takes place in the synapse. Now, what is a synapse? It's a gap between two neurons. Here you can see this is nerve ending, and here is a dendrite. It's written here, dendrite. Right. So let's see in the diagram that nerve impulse, this purple line is coming. Right. This nerve impulse converts into chemical. These chemicals are known as neurotransmitter molecules. Right. This entire is synaptic nerve. All right. Here are the mitochondria. These neurotransmitters, they'll move to the membrane of this synaptic nerve, and this molecule, this vesicle get dissolved, and you can see here these neurotransmitters are free in the cleft, that is gap, synaptic gap. And on the other hand, the dendrites, they have receptor site. These receptor site, they'll detect, these are the receptors which will when the neurotransmitter are present, they'll open. Here you can see there are different, some are open, some are closed. Like this one is closed. Why? Because neurotransmitter is connected to it. This one is closed because neurotransmitter has not yet connected to it. So as soon as the neurotransmitter attach with the receptor opens and send the chemical signal to the next neuron. Now let's see, I'll explain you with a flowchart how this transmission takes place. First neuron, right? From the first neuron, the message has transferred. It has nerve ending, and there is another neuron which is connected to the first neuron through its dendrite, right? The message inside the neuron, it's in the electrical impulse. So right here indicates my electrical impulse. As soon as these electrical signals reaches to the synaptic nerve, these are converted into chemical signals, which will be detected once these chemical signals attach with the other neuron. Again, this will convert into electrical impulse and passes, and the message goes on, finally it reaches to the brain. Clear? This is how the transmission takes place. The dendrites receives the information and starts the chemical reaction which produces electrical impulse which passes through the axon. Right, here dendrites, here we can write electrical which is converting into chemical and again electrical. So in which form the impulses are transmitting? They are transmitting in electrical, chemical, again chemical, and so on. The message is conveyed by chemicals, and such chemicals are known as neurotransmitter. One of the example of neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. So you have to remember the name. If you don't remember, then it's also fine. They are neurotransmitter. The name itself suggests, itself says that neuro, related to neuron, transmitter, one that helps in transferring the data. Now we are moving to the main part of CNS, that is brain. Brain is the main coordinating center in the human body. Right? It's a main coordinating center in the human body. It is protected by, now this entire says about the protection of brain. How the brain is protected. Number one, through cranium. I shall use different colors. Number one, through cranium. Then it is covered with the three membrane, which is known as meninges, and then it is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. So here number one, meninges are number two, and cerebrospinal is number three. So let us try to draw the diagram. Let's say it's a cranium, the skull. Then below the cranium, there are three layers of meninges. Then again, below that, we have brain. Let's assume this is our brain. And between this brain and cranium, there is a fluid. That fluid is known as cerebrospinal fluid. Clear? So let me label it. This fluid is CSF. What is CSF? This 3 number. And these meninges are here. These are the small membranes that protect the brain. So how the brain is protected? Through 3 different methods, right? Through 3 different protective layers are there. Number 1 is cranium, then comes the meninges, and then the final one is CSF, that is cerebrospinal fluid. The brain has 3 parts. What are those parts? Forebrain, number 1, midbrain, number 2, and hindbrain, number 3. Let's see. Let's learn about the forebrain. Forebrain consists of the cerebrum and olfactory lobes. Olfactory, whenever the word comes, please remember it is related to nose, it is related to smell. Okay? Cerebrum, the main big part, right? How we have to learn? You will see there is a cerebellum and cerebrum. How we remember? How we can remember with a simple trick, that is cerebrum is larger part. You can remember with brum, with drum. Drums are usually, bigger one. So we can remember cerebrum is the larger part, whereas cerebellum is smaller. In the diagram, I'll show you. So let's learn about forebrain. Forebrain consists of cerebrum and olfactory lobes. It is the main thinking part of the brain, controls all the voluntary actions. It controls touch, smell, hearing, taste, sight, mental activity like thinking, learning, memory, emotion, etc. These are the functions of forebrain. Then comes the midbrain. It controls involuntary action. So we can say that all the voluntary actions are controlled by forebrain, whereas you can see that involuntary actions are controlled by midbrain and hindbrain. Involuntary actions and reflex movements of the head and neck, eyes. We will learn what are reflex movements. Just we have to remember that midbrain controls all the involuntary actions and reflex movements of the head, neck, and eye. That means you can see the near parts, the parts near to the brain, like head and the eyes and the neck. Then comes the hindbrain. What is the role of hindbrain? It consists of cerebellum, pons, and medulla. Cerebellum controls the body movements, balance, and the posture. So, I have shown you in part 1 certain images that one lady was trying to walk in a straight line, then children were riding the cycle. All these balancing and posture is controlled by cerebellum. Then comes the pons that control respiration. So respiration is controlled by the pons. And then the third one is medulla that controls our heartbeat, blood pressure, swallowing, coughing, sneezing, vomiting, etc. So you can see that these all are involuntary actions. None of it is voluntary. So forebrain, all the voluntary actions, whereas hindbrain and midbrain controls all the involuntary actions. Here is a diagram. You can see in the diagram, it's labeled forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. In these figures, it will be more clear to you. This entire portion is forebrain. That's why I told you this entire portion is cerebrum. So it's a bigger one. And you can compare this small portion is cerebellum, right? Midbrain is this much, whereas this entire is hindbrain. Many of the times, medulla and pons together are also known as stem of the, it is known as brain stem. Okay. Now, this is about this just for your information. We need not to remember, mark up this thing. It's just for our remembrance that this is the part of, these lobes are the part of cerebrum, right? These 4 lobes are the part of cerebrum. Clear? That comes under forebrain. Frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe. How to remember? Front. So it's a frontal lobe. Then Occipital is always opposite to your eyes. That's why it's related to vision, right? Parietal, main thing, it is knowing right from the left, sensation, reading, remembrance. So parietal is at the center because parents are the main center of our life. It's just for the it's just for our memorizing the thing. It's not related to anything else. Okay. Then temporal, near to the ear. That's why you can see one of the characteristics is hearing, right? And as I was telling you, brainstem, it is composed of medulla and pons. All right. Then there is a cerebellum. Main function is balancing, coordination and control of voluntary action, fine muscle control. So this was about the human brain. Now we will learn about the spinal cord. Spinal cord starts from the brain and extends to the vertebral column. What is vertebral column? The bones. As there were cranium, it has these vertebral column in which spinal cord is protected. It has 31 pairs, as we have learned in the part 1 that spinal nerves are total 31. 31 pair of spinal nerves. It carries message to and from the brain. So what is its role? From body, the message reaches to the brain. From brain, it conducts message to the body. So to and from the brain. It also controls reflex action. In the next part, we will learn about the reflex action. Right? So this was about the spinal cord. How the spinal cord are protected? They are protected in vertebral column. They are also having CSF, that is cerebrospinal fluid. Here, cerebrospinal fluid is present that protects the spinal cord from injuries. Now we will move ahead to the reflex action. What is a reflex action? It is a sudden, unconscious and involuntary response of the effector to a stimulus. Right? It's a sudden, for example, here it's given, we suddenly withdraw our hands if we suddenly touch a hot object. In the reflex action, the nerves in the skin detects the heat and passes the message through the sensory nerve to the spinal cord. Then the information passes through the motor nerves to the muscles of the hand and we draw our hand. Now, what is there here? The important thing that we have to point here is the spinal cord, right? What happens here? The message, it's a simple one. It's not that much complicated. Stimulus, sensory nerve reaches to spinal cord. Now spinal cord will give the command through motor nerve to the effector. Right? So what is missing here? Brain. Who is commanding everything? It's a spinal cord. And such kind of reaction are sudden and quick. Such kind of reactions are sudden and quick. These are fast reactions, right? Brain doesn't take part in such kind of reaction. That is reflex action, right? And when we draw entire this is known as reflex arc. Reflex action are of two types. There are two types of reflex action. One is spinal reflex action in which spinal cord is taking place. Another one is cranial reflex action. Spinal example, here, and if the example of cranial reflex action is blinking of eye all of the sudden when a light falls on your eyes, right? So you not blinking of eye, rather we should write closing of eyes. When high intensity light fall on the eyes, right? So there are two types of reflex action. Number one is cranial, another one is spinal, right? Reflex action, remember always they are quick actions, right? The response is quick, faster. Here is another example. Let us see, let's learn about this reaction. Hot object, right? This is the stimuli. The message you can see here, it's going to the spinal cord. Spinal cord sends the signal and the person has removed his hand. Now let's try to read all the things. Hot object, direction of stimuli, right? Then cell body of the neuron, axon of afferent. Now what is afferent and efferent? You can see efferent, that is moving away, afferent, that is moving towards. Clear? This entire is spinal cord. And what happened when the message dendrites, when the message reaches to the muscles, muscle contracts and withdraw parts from the stimuli, right? So always response is observed due to stimuli. This is what about the reflex action is. One more reflex action. Reflex action. Now here, what is there in this reflex action? The reflex action is about hammer, right? Tendon. When the hammer is raised, what happened? Message reaches to the spinal cord. It conveys back the message and we jerk. Because of the jerk, we lift the leg. Now comes the reflex arc. What is reflex arc? It's a pathway of reflex action, right? In a reflex arc, stimulus is received by a receptor, that is sense organ, and passes through the sensory nerves to the spinal cord. From the spinal cord, the information passes through the motor nerves to the effector muscles of the gland for the response. Here you can see the stimulus, receptor, sensory nerve will pass a message to the spinal cord. Spinal cord will send message through the motor nerves to the effector and we will see the response. One more, receptors and effector. Here we will now discuss about the difference between cerebral reflex and spinal reflex. Cerebral, that means cranial reflex action. What is that? It's controlled by the brain, take place in head region, cranial nerves are involved. Controlled by the spinal cord, take place in the rest of the body and spinal nerves are involved in it. We'll learn now about the control and coordination in plants in the next video. Thank you.